everybody! Happy belated Lunar New Year to those who celebrate it. Special shout out to Atna, Jerome, and Mallory. Y'all are the realest. I've got another one that's tailored to the non-Asians out there. So raise your hand if you know what I'm talking about when I say Thai man in San Francisco. If you don't know, please just take the time to look up the story. It's definitely worth knowing. Pretty much, an 84-year-old Thai man was walking in San Francisco when he was shoved to the ground, and unfortunately he passed away. He was shoved for no legitimate reason. It was an unprovoked attack. And watching the video of it happen was both heartbreaking and infuriating at the same time. What about the story of the 61-year-old Filipino man who needed stitches after he got on the New York City subway? And he needed stitches because he was slashed in the face with a box cutter. And he almost died from blood loss because nobody was there to help him. Or there's also the story of the 91-year-old man who was shoved to the ground in California. And these are just a few examples of what's happening in this community. And what's wild is that it's not even an American problem. This became a problem when COVID-19 first came to light. It became a global problem. The number of hate crimes against Asian Americans is skyrocketing. And last year, over 8 weeks, March 2020 to May 2020, there were over 1,800 racist attacks against Asian Americans. And it didn't stop. We're in February 2021, and the numbers are still just getting higher. So in one of my sport classes, we were talking about media representation for athletes. And that conversation led to a discussion on media representation for different ethnic groups. Very long story short, I asked one of my colleagues about her social media and what types of articles she normally sees. And it's not to call her out, obviously, but I honestly was curious. I wanted to know how and how often Asian Americans or Asians in general are in the news, and how often non-Asians hear about this community in the news. Being an Asian myself with a very large Asian network, I'm exposed to it daily. But what if you were, say, in the Latinx community, or if you were white? How often do you hear about things happening to Asians or Asian Americans in your media? And if you haven't heard about what's going on, it's probably because you're not following Asian or Asian American news. Now, you not following isn't the problem. The problem is that mainstream media doesn't highlight these kinds of stories. And I'll bet, honestly, if the ethnicities of both the victim and the offender were different, it would be all over the news. And my point isn't that one ethnicity is more important for the media than the other. It's nothing like that. It's just that Asian American issues are kept hidden or they're often ignored. And I have no idea how the algorithm works, but it only shows up on people's feeds in very certain situations. It's that freaking algorithm. It's got a lot of control over what people are seeing, and it's super frustrating. Honestly, it doesn't make any sense why mainstream American news isn't covering stories like this. There's this sense of indifference to the attacks that make a lot of Asian Americans feel like their voices don't matter. So, the anti-Asian sentiment can be traced back to the early 1900s, maybe even before, but they reached an entirely new level with the start of COVID-19. And we've all heard the virus be called different things, like the Chinese virus or the Kung flu. So it's honestly no surprise that people began to other the Asian American community. Not that that's okay, but I guess I can understand. It's out of fear. We also tend to associate violence with hate crimes, but that's not always the case. Yes, that's correct. Violence is part of it. I'm not trying to minimize that. But it doesn't always have to involve physical injury. It involves the act of someone traumatizing, instilling fear, and negatively impacting victims in certain communities. That counts as hate crimes. Racial slurs, bullying, harassment. NYPD, New York Police Department. The NYPD data showed that last year, in 2020, anti-Asian hate crimes increased by 1,900%. What even is that percent? They also said there are likely more cases that haven't been reported because of the victim's language barrier. Also, if you haven't heard, Biden signed an executive order to combat anti-Asian racism. Yes, that's amazing, but the attacks have still continued. And they most likely still will. There's also this false belief that because Asian Americans fall under that model minority myth, that they can't be victims of racism. No. This has been happening for so long. And a lot of people actually refer to the murder of Vincent Chin in 1982. He was beaten to death by 2 white men because they thought that he was Japanese, even though he's Chinese. They beat Vincent out of anger, and they said that because of people like him, they are out of work. In the end, they received a $3,000 fine and 0 prison time. frustrating, right? Their sentencing outraged so many people that it's considered the fuel that sparked the entire Pan-Asian American rights movement. So how do we address this issue? How do we support the Asian American community? For myself, I'm utilizing my platforms. This video, for example. This video can be a resource for the communities that either aren't aware of the issue or want to learn more about it, or both. I am very much a believer in inter-community or interracial dialogue. We need to have these conversations with people outside of our communities. We need to expand the dialogue. And that's why I asked Fran, my colleague, if she's ever even heard of the issue. And 100% it was not meant to make her feel bad at all, which thankfully she didn't feel bad. It was to create a conversation where we can educate one another on our different perspectives. If we're all in this together, we shouldn't avoid these kinds of conversations. We need to ensure that we're protecting each other, and that doesn't always mean saving one another. And having these conversations is hopefully going to lead to long-term solutions in this environment that we all share. And that ties in with education. Please, 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 please do not be that person that reacts or responds with anger to people that are trying. You want more representation, you want more awareness, you want more conversations. But when people who aren't in that community say something incorrectly, they get ripped to shreds. It's infuriating when people do that. How are people going to learn and want to support these communities when they're treated that way? Doesn't make sense. So please, if you are Asian or if you're in the Asian American community, do not make people feel bad for what they do not know. You have an entire life of experience, they do not. But I mean, if someone's being a prick, that's just a whole different story. Do better, everybody. Just do better. And what does that mean? It means having empathy for the situation. Understand that this community needs help and a lending hand. You don't know what to say? We got you. Retweet or repost words of Asian Americans that are speaking out on the topic. Also, others could disagree, but even just trying to educate yourself on the issues is enough for me. I think that's a huge step. Because with education, you become more vocal and you become more confident having those conversations and speaking out about the issues. I don't know about anybody else, but if I don't know a lot about something, I don't want to say anything. Especially if I say something wrong and then it really offends people and then I get my ass beat. It could even help you with speaking up when you see something happening, hear something happening. It takes so much time, and to me, education is just the start, and it's a good start. No one can know every single thing happening in every community every second of the day. So if you're not Asian and you're watching this, I appreciate you. I appreciate you and I am grateful for your presence. Alright, so I thought that it would be nice to include some resources too. Everything that I mentioned is going to be down below in the description if you are interested in taking a look at it or doing your own further research. And I really tried to come up with a lot of community resources, but I found that that was really difficult because potentially people watching this are not from Chicago and I don't know all the different resources everywhere. So first, if you want to know more about anti-Asian racism or xenophobia, PBS has a 5-part docuseries talking about Asian Americans and their history, all about the Asian American experience. This could be one for people who prefer visuals and watching versus reading something. And for those of you that do like to read, this is an article by The Conversation about US racism towards Asian Americans and how it went from yellow peril to model minority to now Chinese virus. Both give historical context, which I think is really helpful because it shows you all the different angles and how this issue really came to be. Here is another article from National Geographic. This explains the timeline of racism against Asian Americans. So it gives you a good visual and understanding of when things really started and how it's evolved or not evolved. My last one is from Stop Asian American Pacific Islander Hate. I think this is a site also worth looking at. Right on the homepage, they have a little section where you can report hate crimes or incidents, and reporting incidents is huge. When you report something, that information goes to current data, and then that data goes to certain articles that we're reading to stay up to date on the issues and what's going on in the community. All the articles that we read for education, for advocacy, all of that. And I know there are thousands that I'm missing, so if you know of any that you really want to share, please comment below with it, because I know there are resources that get very specific with the ethnicity too. But because there are so many and it can be really overwhelming, just starting with a general knowledge of the history of Asian Americans is a really good place to start. Knowing about their experiences in this country specifically is going to give you a better idea of what is going on. And it's really overwhelming. It is, even for us in the community. It's a lot of information. But I think that these resources are really for people who are not in the Asian community or Asian American community. And they're really great for people who want to learn before they practice. So yeah, that's today's video. This is a huge issue that we are facing, but even just watching this video is a big step in the right direction. And if you found this video interesting, please feel free to share it, not even for my own benefit, but just so we can raise awareness for what's going on in the Asian American community. You know, have those interracial conversations. And speaking of that, with the algorithm that I mentioned earlier, again, not for my own personal benefit, but liking this video also helps with that YouTube algorithm that like makes it pop up more. And again, if you have any resources that you are aware of, please comment below with them. We want this to be a well-rounded resource for people. Feel free to subscribe. If not, feel free to follow me on Instagram. My handle is intricate. Otherwise, I'll see you at the next one. Thank you. Bye.